I'm Travis, 34 years old, the black sheep entrepreneur in a family of Boston professionals. Returning home for Grandma L's 85th birthday felt like walking into a performance review with failing grades. My brother Rich, golden child and corporate lawyer extraordinaire, waited with his perfect smile and sharper judgments. I promised myself I'd stay positive despite the knot in my stomach. Then at dinner, it happened. Rich smirked across mahogany and crystal. She still thinks running a startup counts as a real job. But Grandma, sweet as pie, turned to him and said, "That startup just bought out your firm, dear." The silence was immediate. Hey folks. Before I dive into this wild family drama, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated, trust me. What comes next is worth sticking around for. Growing up in Brookline, a leafy suburb just outside Boston proper, our family home was a monument to traditional success. A stately colonial with perfectly trimmed hedges and a 3-car garage housing luxury vehicles, the physical manifestation of my father's corporate achievements. Howard Miller, Senior VP at a Fortune 500 company, followed in my grandfather's executive footsteps. My mother Marie, though technically a stay-at-home mom, ran the household with corporate efficiency while serving on various charity boards. The Miller name meant something in our circles. Richard, 3 years my senior, embodied everything the Miller legacy demanded. From his first day of kindergarten, he was marked for greatness. Perfect grades, student government, debate team captain, varsity tennis, achievements accumulated like compound interest. I still remember his high school graduation where the principal actually said, "Richard Miller is going places." Dad beamed. Mom dabbed tears with an embroidered handkerchief. Then there was me. Where Rich approached life with strategic precision, I saw possibilities everywhere. Why follow established pathways when you could forge new ones? School bored me senseless, not because I couldn't do the work, but because I couldn't see the point of regurgitating information without practical application. My report cards featured a consistent comment: "Travis has potential if only he would apply himself." The breaking point came during my junior year at Boston University. While Rich was thriving at Harvard Law, I was skipping business classes to attend tech meetups. When I called my parents to announce I was dropping out to start a digital platform for student housing, Dad went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom just sighed. "Travis, when will you start taking life seriously?" Richard's condescension started early. I was 11 when I built my first computer from salvaged parts. While I was excitedly explaining the process to our family at Sunday dinner, Rich, 14 and already speaking like a miniature adult, cut in. "That's cute, but real engineers get degrees first, Travis." Everyone chuckled. I stopped talking about my projects at family gatherings after that. Holidays became performances where I played the cautionary tale. Thanksgiving featured turkey, cranberry sauce, and questions about when I'd get a proper job. Christmas brought presents and reminders of Rich's latest accomplishment. Easter had chocolate eggs and comparisons to cousins who were settling down nicely. Only Grandma Eleanor saw me differently. Dad's mother, a small woman with knowing eyes and hands always busy with one craft project or another, she'd find me hiding in the library during family gatherings. "Tell me what you're dreaming up now, Travis," she'd say, genuinely interested in my latest idea. Her husband, my grandfather, had been a corporate executive like my father, but Grandma had a secret rebellious streak. She'd confided once that she'd wanted to open a bookstore before marriage redirected her life. "You've got the spark," she told me when I was 16. "The same one my brother George had." He built something from nothing too. Great-uncle George, rarely mentioned in family lore, had started a manufacturing company that failed during the Depression. The family considered him the reckless one, but Grandma spoke of him with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Richard's star kept rising. Graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law. Clerked for a federal judge. Joined Thornfield and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious corporate law firms. Made partner by 32, youngest in the firm's history. His wedding to Heather, a pediatric surgeon from a family equally obsessed with credentials, was featured in Boston Magazine. Each step in his ascent cast my path in starker shadow. My parents introduced him as our son, the lawyer, and me as our son, Travis. They never explicitly said they were disappointed in me, but their concerned questions spoke volumes. How much longer will you try this before considering a more stable position? Your cousin Joseph is hiring at the insurance company. Should I mention your name? Don't you want what Richard has? The painful irony was that I had never wanted what Richard had, the corner office, the company car, the golden handcuffs. But I desperately wanted what Richard received: approval, pride, belonging. Each family gathering, I arrived with news of small victories, a new client, a positive article. Minor growth, only to have them nodded at politely before someone asked Rich about his latest corporate takeover case. I became the family's cautionary tale. Study hard or you'll struggle like Travis, I once overheard my aunt telling my younger cousin. Being the example of what not to do cuts deeper than simple disapproval. When Richard made partner, my parents threw an elaborate dinner party. I congratulated him sincerely. Despite our differences, I respected his dedication. Thanks, he said, champagne flute in hand. You know, there's always room in the mailroom if you get tired of playing businessman. He laughed like it was a joke between equals. It wasn't. That night, I decided to stop seeking their validation. I would build something remarkable, something undeniable. Not to prove them wrong, though that thought sustained me through dark moments, but to prove to myself that I had been right all along. The day I dropped out of Boston University was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd been half-heartedly pursuing a business degree while spending most of my time coding and attending tech meetups. The final straw came when a professor dismissed my questions about adapting the curriculum to the digital economy as unnecessarily disruptive. I packed my dorm room that afternoon. My parents cut financial support immediately, a tough love approach they believed would send me crawling back to academia within months. Instead, I moved into a tiny apartment in Somerville with 2 roommates, and took night shifts at a 24-hour diner to keep the lights on. I met Jasmine at a hackathon in Cambridge 3 months later. She was brilliant, an MIT computer science grad with algorithmic thinking that complemented my user-centered approach perfectly, while other teams built flashy apps with limited utility. We created a simple but powerful solution for textbook exchanges that won first prize. We stayed up all night afterwards at an IHOP, planning what would become our first startup, TextTrade. TextTrade launched with optimism and crashed with valuable lessons. We built a beautiful platform for college students to exchange textbooks, but underestimated the aggressive tactics of campus bookstores. After 8 months of ramen noodles and sleeping on office floors, we had to shut down operations. Jasmine and I sat on my fire escape with a bottle of cheap whiskey, mourning our first failure. We built something good, she said, just not something sustainable. My parents' reaction was predictably smug. Now will you consider finishing your degree? Mom asked. Rich sent me an Indeed.com link to entry-level sales positions. I ignored them all and started working on our next idea. VenueLens struggled but taught us even more. A platform connecting event planners with unique venues. It generated just enough revenue to keep us going for 18 months before market saturation forced another difficult closure. I was 26, had 2 failures on my resume, and was deeper in debt than I cared to admit. Rich had just made junior partner. Failure is just data collection, Jasmine insisted one night as we were clearing out our second office. We know exactly what doesn't work now. Our third venture emerged from frustration with the banking options available to small businesses like ours. Traditional banks treated us like annoyances. Their digital tools were clunky afterthoughts. Over beers and whiteboards, FinFlow was born, a fintech solution reimagining how small to medium businesses accessed financial services, simplified compliance, and managed cash flow. The early days of FinFlow defined austerity. Our office was my garage apartment with spotty Wi-Fi. Jasmine coded while sitting on a beanbag chair rescued from a curb. I pitched investors by day and drove for rideshare companies by night. My credit cards hit their limits, then Jasmine's did too. We lived on bulk pasta and free condiment packets. Samuel Marcus became our first angel investor after I cornered him at a tech mixer. A semi-retired software executive with a soft spot for underdogs, he wrote a check for $50,000 after a 2-hour conversation at a coffee shop. "You're either going to lose me this money or make me a fortune," he said, "and I'm curious which it'll be." That investment bought us 6 more months. But technical challenges nearly sank us before we launched. Our initial platform crashed during beta testing, losing 2 weeks of financial data. A key developer quit after being offered triple his salary elsewhere. Jasmine developed insomnia. I started having panic attacks in grocery stores. The lowest point came 3 years in. We'd secured modest funding but were running out of runway with no major client breakthrough. I found Jasmine staring at our dwindling bank account at 3 in the morning. "Maybe they were right," I said. "Maybe this isn't a real business." Jasmine looked at me steadily. "If you believe that, we should close up tomorrow. But if you don't, we need to pivot, now." That conversation led to our breakthrough. Instead of trying to replace traditional banking entirely, we repositioned as an integration layer that made existing financial institutions work better for small businesses. We rebuilt the platform in 6 weeks of marathon coding sessions. Catherine Winters, a retired banking executive who'd become our mentor, reviewed the new approach. "Now you're solving a problem banks actually want solved," she said. "You're not threatening their existence. You're extending their capabilities." Her industry connections opened doors we'd been beating our heads against for years. FinFlow 2.0 launched quietly but gained traction quickly. Small business owners loved the intuitive interface. Banks appreciated the seamless compliance tools. Revenue began to grow, slowly at first, then exponentially as word spread. The personal cost had been substantial. I'd gone through periods of depression so severe I could barely leave my apartment. Friends stopped inviting me out because I never had money for drinks or dinner. A promising relationship with Allison, a graphic designer I'd met through a client, collapsed after 6 months because she couldn't handle the startup lifestyle's uncertainty. "I never know which Travis I'm getting," she said during our breakup. "The inspired visionary or the stressed-out wreck who checks his phone every 2 minutes. Then I met Sophia at a tech conference in Chicago. She ran her own digital marketing consultancy and understood the entrepreneurial roller coaster intimately. Instead of being destabilized by my erratic schedule and fluctuating moods, she recognized them as part of the package. "Bad days don't scare me," she said on our 3rd date. "What matters is you get back up every time." 5 years after founding FinFlow, everything changed. Several major financial institutions began using our platform, bringing stability and significant revenue. Then NextBank, a forward-thinking financial giant, approached us about acquisition. The initial offer was substantial. The revised offer after 3 months of negotiation was life-changing. The most surreal aspect? During due diligence, we discovered that NextBank had recently acquired Thornfield Holdings, the parent company of my brother's law firm. The cosmic coincidence was too perfect to ignore. If the deal went through, my hobby business would technically own my brother's prestigious employer. I told only Jasmine, Sophia, and Grandma Eleanor about this detail. The paperwork was complex, and I didn't want to jinx anything by premature announcements. Besides, a small, admittedly petty part of me savored the thought of revealing this twist at exactly the right moment. That moment arrived sooner than expected, at Grandma's 85th birthday dinner. Grandma Eleanor's 85th birthday fell on a perfect New England autumn Sunday. Driving to my parents' house, I watched red and gold leaves dance across the road while mentally rehearsing neutral conversation topics. Sophia had planned to join me, but a client emergency kept her in New York. "Text me updates," she said. "And remember, you don't need their approval anymore." The familiar driveway still made my stomach tighten. The house looked exactly as it always had, imposing colonial, freshly painted shutters, Martha Stewart-worthy seasonal wreath on the front door. I sat in my car longer than necessary, watching my parents move around the kitchen through the bay window. For a moment, I was 16 again, dreading another dinner of subtle disappointment. My car, a modest but new electric sedan, looked conspicuously ordinary next to Dad's Mercedes and what I assumed was Rich's latest BMW. I deliberately avoided flashy purchases despite the pending acquisition. Nothing about me screamed successful entrepreneur. Just another intentional choice my family would misinterpret as necessity. Mom opened the door before I knocked, perfect in designer casual with freshly highlighted hair. "Travis, you made it." Her hug was genuine if brief. "Where's Sophie?" "Sophia," I corrected for the dozenth time. "Client emergency in New York." "Oh, that's too bad." Mom's expression flickered with something. Relief? One fewer witness to family dynamics? "Come in, everyone's almost here." The foyer smelled of lemon polish and Mom's signature potpourri. Family photos lined the entryway table, mostly featuring Richard at various life milestones. My college graduation photo was notably absent, for obvious reasons. A new edition showed Rich and Heather holding their law firm's charity gala trophy. Dad emerged from his study, martini already in hand. "Travis," he said with a firm handshake. "Good drive-in?" "Not bad. How's retirement treating you?" Dad had stepped down as SVP 6 months earlier, though he still consulted 3 days a week. Unable to fully relinquish his corporate identity. "Keeping busy. Joined 2 more boards last month." He glanced at his watch. "Richard's running a few minutes late. Big case just settled." Of course. Rich's lateness was important. Anyone else's would be inconsiderate. I found Grandma Eleanor in the living room, elegant in a blue dress that matched her still bright eyes. Unlike everyone else in the family, she'd aged naturally, silver hair in a simple bob, laugh lines proudly displayed. She extended both hands as I approached. "There's my entrepreneur," she said warmly. "Come tell me everything while these others fuss with dinner arrangements." For 15 minutes, I had her undivided attention as I explained FinFlow's recent developments in terms she could follow. She asked thoughtful questions about our business model and growth strategy. "Sounds like all those nights working instead of sleeping are finally paying off," she said with a knowing smile. The front door opened with purpose, announcing Richard's arrival. His voice carried from the foyer. "Sorry we're late. The Johnson merger documentation needed my personal review." Rich entered the living room with Heather following precisely 2 steps behind, a detail that always bothered me about their relationship. He looked like a law firm brochure come to life. Bespoke suit despite the Sunday casual setting, designer eyeglasses, immaculate haircut. Heather, perpetually elegant and subtly uncomfortable, wore what I recognized as this season's high-end fashion. "Travis," Rich said with practiced cordiality. "Still driving that economy model? Business must be steady." His smile never reached his eyes. "Richard," I returned evenly. "How's the corporate law world treating you?" "Exceptionally well. We just closed the Johnson case, $23 million in billables." He turned immediately to Grandma. "Happy birthday, Grandmother. You look wonderful." Gregory Fisher, Uncle Greg, though no actual relation, arrived next with his signature bourbon cake. A longtime family friend and Dad's former colleague, he'd always been kind to me. "Travis, my boy," he boomed, clapping my shoulder. "Your grandmother's been telling me about your financial software. Sounds impressive." Rich coughed lightly. "Finfling, was it?" Finflow. I corrected. Right, of course. Rich turned to our father. Dad, you won't believe who I ran into at the club yesterday. Judge Harrington mentioned the foundation board has an opening. And just like that, I became invisible again. Dinner preparations created the usual choreographed chaos. Mom directed traffic in the kitchen while Dad gave anyone within earshot a detailed explanation of the wine he'd selected. I offered to help and was assigned the safest task: helping Grandma to her seat. The dining room exemplified my mother's taste: traditional, impeccable, and slightly intimidating. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, set with the Wedgwood china reserved for important occasions. Place cards positioned everyone with diplomatic precision, except Richard sat at Dad's right hand, the position of honor. I found my name at the opposite end, between Uncle Greg and an empty chair for Sophia. Grandma Eleanor, however, had other ideas. Travis will sit by me, she announced, plucking my place card and moving it next to hers near the middle of the table. I see Richard every other Sunday at church. Travis is my birthday treat. Mom looked briefly flustered but recovered. Of course, Mother Miller. Whatever you prefer. As we settled into our seats, Rich dominated the conversation with a detailed account of his latest courtroom victory. The opposing counsel actually tried to cite Henderson versus Wilkins, if you can believe it. I simply reminded the judge of the Pearson precedent, and you could see the realization dawn. He paused for appreciative chuckles at legal humor only he understood. The first course arrived, Mom's famous butternut squash soup. Conversation fractured into smaller exchanges. Dad and Richard discussed golf handicaps. Mom asked Heather about her hospital's fundraiser. Uncle Greg, bless him, turned to me. Your grandmother tells me you've developed some innovative compliance tools for banks. I've got a buddy at First National who might be interested. We're actually working with several national institutions already. I began, focusing on integrating. Rich's voice cut through from across the table. Speaking of banking, did I mention our firm just became outside counsel for United Financial? Tremendous opportunity. Lawrence personally asked me to head the team. All eyes shifted to Richard. The familiar weight of invisibility settled over me again. As the main course was served, herb-crusted rack of lamb with Mom's precision-roasted vegetables, Dad steered the conversation toward his favorite topic: career trajectories. Richard, I had lunch with Walter Thompson last week. He mentioned your firm's quarterly reports set new records. Dad carved his lamb with surgical precision, pride evident in his voice. Rich straightened almost imperceptibly, his moment in the spotlight. The last quarter was our best ever. Lawrence credits my restructuring of the corporate division. We're projecting 17% growth next fiscal year. Remarkable in this economy. Dad nodded approvingly. Mom, dutifully playing her role, turned to me. And how is your computer business, Travis? The slight pause said everything about her understanding of my work. We've had a transformative year. I began, genuinely excited to share. Our platform now processes over 8 billion in transactions monthly, and we've expanded our team to 8 billion? Richard interrupted with an arched eyebrow. That seems rather optimistic for a startup. It's not an estimate, it's actual transaction volume. I clarified. Our banking partners. Travis has always had a creative way with numbers. Rich said to Uncle Greg with a knowing smile. Remember his lemonade stand business plan in 5th grade? He projected becoming a millionaire by middle school. Laughter rippled around the table. I felt my face flush but kept my expression neutral. Actually, Grandma Eleanor interjected, I remember that business plan being quite sophisticated for a 10-year-old. Travis has always understood value creation. Rich's smile tightened. Of course, Grandmother. We all have our talents. Travis has his ideas. I just deal with financial realities at scale. My phone vibrated against my leg. A text from Jasmine. All signed. We're officially part of Next Bank. You're now technically part owner of Thornfield Holdings. Congratulations, CEO. A surge of vindication rushed through me, but I tucked the phone away without responding. Not yet. So Travis, Dad redirected. Any prospects for settling into a more established position? I heard Monotech is expanding their IT department. The familiar suggestion that I abandon entrepreneurship for a real job hung in the air. Before I could answer, Rich chimed in. I could introduce Travis to our IT director. They might have something entry-level that wouldn't require completing a degree. His tone was helpful, his meaning crystal clear. My brother still saw me as a dropout who needed rescuing. That's thoughtful, I replied evenly. But we've just closed a significant deal that requires my full attention. Another hopeful round of funding? Rich asked. What's this, your third startup attempt? FinFlow is actually our most successful venture to date, I said, struggling to keep defensiveness from my voice. We've been cash flow positive for 11 months. That's wonderful, Mom said with the same enthusiasm she used for children's participation trophies. Richard cut his lamb with practiced precision. Positive cash flow is certainly a step up from your previous ventures. Though in real business terms, that's just breaking even, isn't it? I took a measured sip of water, remembering Sophia's advice to breathe before responding. Our metrics go considerably beyond breaking even. Travis has always been persistent. Dad interjected with what he probably thought was supportive, even when his projects don't quite materialize as expected. A memory flashed, my 16th birthday. Proudly showing Dad the website I'd built from scratch, his distracted, "That's nice, son," as he checked his BlackBerry for work emails. The same dismissal, different day. Remember Thanksgiving 4 years ago? Richard turned to Heather. Travis was launching that venue app. What happened with that one? Market timing issues, I said tightly. Ah, yes. Market timing. Richard made air quotes. Always some external factor, isn't it? The conversation shifted as Mom served her famous roasted Brussels sprouts, but the damage was done. I sat silently, pushing food around my plate, fighting the familiar feeling of being 16 again, the perpetual disappointment in a family of achievers. Travis was telling me about his banking clients, Grandma offered, trying to resurrect my dignity. It sounds quite impressive. I'm sure it is, Mother Miller, Dad said indulgently. Travis has always been enthusiastic about his projects. Enthusiastic. The faint praise stung worse than direct criticism. Richard, emboldened by our father's tacit approval, continued. What Travis doesn't understand about banking is the regulatory complexity. My firm handles compliance for major financial institutions, and let me tell you, it's not something you can manage with a few programmers in a garage. I thought about our team of 37 highly credentialed engineers and our patented compliance automation system that was revolutionizing the industry. But what was the point? They'd already decided what I was years ago. How is Bradley doing at the firm? Mom asked Richard, changing the subject to his protege associate. Promising, though he needs seasoning. I've taken him under my wing, showing him how real corporate law functions. Richard smiled. Not everyone understands that success requires structure and discipline, not just winging it with creative ideas. The pointed comment hung in the air. Uncle Greg looked uncomfortable. Heather studied her wine glass. Dad nodded approvingly. My phone buzzed again. Jasmine had sent the press release draft announcing the acquisition, scheduled for tomorrow morning. One button would make it all public. Tempting, but not yet. I think entrepreneurship requires tremendous discipline, Grandma Eleanor said firmly. Perhaps more than following an established path. Richard's expression suggested polite disagreement with an elder. With respect, grandmother, there's a reason established paths exist. They've been proven successful. The failure rate for startups is what, 90%? That's not a career, that's a gamble. Some might call it courage, she countered. Richard laughed lightly, turning to our father. Remember when Travis decided senior year he was going to revolutionize the school's computer lab? All that time wasted when he should have been focusing on college applications. I actually completed that project, I noted. The system I implemented saved the school thousands in licensing fees. Yes, but at what opportunity cost? While you were playing computer handyman. I was securing my Harvard acceptance. Richard turned to Mom. This lamb is perfectly done, by the way. The conversation shifted to Heather's hospital work. But I caught Richard watching me with that familiar expression, a mixture of pity and superiority that dated back to childhood. As dessert was served, Grandma's favorite lemon cake, Dad raised his glass. To Mother, 85 years young, and to family success in all its forms. Speaking of success, Richard couldn't help adding, Lawrence mentioned I'm on track for senior partner next year. Youngest in firm history. Wonderful news. Mom beamed. We should drink to that too. Dad agreed, raising his glass again. And what about Travis's news? Grandma Eleanor asked pointedly. Didn't you mention a significant development, dear? All eyes reluctantly turned to me. For a moment, I considered sharing the acquisition, the validation, the vindication. But Richard spoke before I could decide. I'm sure Travis's app is making progress, he said with a patronizing smile. Grandmother has always been your biggest fan. She still thinks running a startup counts as a real job. The table fell silent. Mom looked mortified. Dad stared at his cake. Uncle Greg winced visibly. And then, Grandma Eleanor smiled sweetly, turned to Richard and said, That startup just bought out your firm, dear. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's face transitioned from smug amusement to confusion to dawning horror in the span of 3 seconds. He froze with his dessert fork halfway to his mouth. What? He finally managed. Travis's company, Grandma Eleanor continued calmly. The one you've been dismissing all evening. It was acquired by NextBank, which now owns Thornfield Holdings, which owns your law firm. She took a delicate bite of lemon cake. The cake is lovely, Marie. Dad choked on his wine. That's not possible. I finally pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. The papers were finalized this afternoon. NextBank acquired FinFlow in a cash and stock deal. Part of our negotiation included me taking a senior position overseeing their technical integration with subsidiaries, including Thornfield Holdings. Richard's face had drained of all color. You're lying. The press release goes out tomorrow morning, I said, sliding my phone toward him. You can read the draft if you'd like. He snatched the phone, eyes darting across the screen. With each second, his complexion shifted from pale to ashen. This is some kind of joke. I assure you it's not, I replied, feeling strangely calm. The acquisition is valued at just under $300 million. NextBank acquired Thornfield Holdings last quarter in a separate deal we discovered during due diligence. That's impossible, Richard repeated, but with less conviction. Lawrence would have told us if the firm had been sold. Only the parent company's board was informed initially. I explained. Standard procedure in acquisitions of this size. The formal announcement to employees is scheduled for next week. Dad's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching respect. $300 million? For your software? For our financial technology platform, yes, I corrected gently. FinFlow processes billions in transactions monthly for regional and national banks. Our compliance automation tools are industry-leading. Richard was frantically texting someone, Lawrence. I presumed. This can't be happening, he muttered. Mom looked completely lost. I don't understand. Travis, are you saying you own Richard's company now? Not exactly, I clarified. FinFlow has been acquired by NextBank, which owns Thornfield Holdings, which owns Richard's firm. Technically, we're all under the same corporate umbrella now. with me in a senior technology integration role. Richard's phone rang. He jumped up from the table, answering as he rushed into the hallway. Lawrence? What's going on? I just heard. His voice faded as he moved away from the dining room. Well, Uncle Greg said into the awkward silence, I think this calls for something stronger than wine. He pulled a flask from his jacket and added a generous splash to his coffee. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Why didn't you tell us this was happening? Would you have believed me? I asked simply. He had no answer for that. Grandma Eleanor patted my hand under the table. I always knew you'd find your way, she said softly. Mom still looked puzzled. But what does this mean exactly? For Richard's position? Nothing changes immediately, I assured her. The law firm continues operating as before. The integration affects mainly back-office systems, not day-to-day legal work. We could hear Richard's voice rising in the hallway. That's not acceptable, Lawrence. How could you not inform the partners? We have rights. Heather, who'd been silently observing this entire time, finally spoke. Congratulations, Travis. That's quite an achievement. Her tone suggested she might actually mean it. Thank you, I replied, genuinely appreciative of her grace in an awkward situation. Richard stormed back into the dining room, face flushed with anger. Lawrence confirmed it, he announced tersely. Thornfield was sold to Next Bank 3 months ago. The management team kept it from the partners pending integration planning. He glared at me. Did you orchestrate this whole thing just to humiliate me? The acquisition opportunities developed separately, I explained calmly. FinFlow had been in talks with Next Bank for months before we discovered they'd recently acquired Thornfield Holdings. It was a coincidence. A convenient one, he snapped. Richard, Grandma Eleanor said firmly, your brother has worked incredibly hard for this success. Perhaps instead of assuming malice, you might consider congratulating him. Richard looked like he'd been asked to swallow glass. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he managed. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied. The victory felt hollow somehow. For years I'd imagined this moment of vindication, but the reality was just sad. My brother looked broken, and my parents seemed lost between their established worldview and this new reality. I need some air, Richard said abruptly, pushing back from the table. He strode toward the back door. Heather rose gracefully. I should check on him. Please excuse us. She paused beside my chair. He'll come around eventually. This is just unexpected. After they left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Dad cleared his throat. Travis, I had no idea your business had reached this level. You should have told us. I tried, Dad. For years. No one wanted to hear it. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Well, this is quite something. We're proud of you, son. The words I'd waited decades to hear landed with surprising emptiness. Mom wiped away tears I couldn't quite interpret. Uncle Greg raised his flask in silent toast. I think I'll check on Richard, I said, standing from the table. Excuse me for a moment. As I headed toward the back porch. Grandma Eleanor caught my hand. Remember, true success isn't measured by proving others wrong, she murmured. It's finding peace with yourself. I squeezed her hand gently. I'm still working on that part. I found Richard alone on the back porch, gripping the railing like it might prevent him from falling off the earth. The evening had cooled, and his breath made small clouds in the autumn air. He didn't turn when the door opened. If you've come to gloat, save it, he said tersely. I moved beside him, maintaining a careful distance. That's not why I'm here. Then why? To offer me a job? His laugh was bitter. The great startup founder, swooping in to rescue his corporate drone brother? I came to make sure you're okay, I said simply. He turned to me then, anger flashing in his eyes. Okay? You blindsided me in front of our entire family. You let me sit there talking about firm leadership while knowing the whole time that my firm had been sold. Was this your plan all along? Years of playing the underdog entrepreneur. Just waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me? I found out about the Thornfield acquisition during our due diligence 3 weeks ago. I explained. The next bank deal has been in motion for nearly a year. There was no master plan, Rich. So it's just a cosmic joke that your little software project ended up owning my law firm? His voice dripped skepticism. After years of me not taking you seriously? It's business, not personal, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Richard paced the length of the porch. You could have warned me privately before dinner. Given me a chance to prepare, to inform my team. He stopped, glaring. But that wouldn't have been as satisfying, would it? You needed an audience. The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I had savored the moment of revelation, however briefly. You're right, I admitted. I could have handled it differently. Part of me wanted that moment of, I don't know, vindication? Recognition? After years of being treated like a failure, I wanted everyone to see I wasn't. So you made me look like a fool instead. That wasn't my intention. I leaned against the railing. But I won't apologize for my success, Rich. I've worked incredibly hard for this. And I haven't? He demanded. Do you have any idea what it takes to make partner at Thornfield? The hours, the pressure, the competition? I've sacrificed everything to build my career. I know you have. I acknowledged. You've always been dedicated and disciplined. I've respected that about you. Even when you couldn't respect what I was building. Because startups fail. 90% of them never make it. His controlled facade cracked. Do you know why I pushed so hard for you to get a real job? Because I couldn't stand watching you struggle year after year, living in that crappy apartment, maxing out credit cards. He stopped abruptly. While you what? I prompted. Richard ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it for perhaps the first time in years. While I was terrified of failure, he finally admitted. One mistake, one lost case, one dissatisfied client, and everything I'd built could crumble. You think Dad's expectations for you were high? Try being the golden child sometime. The revelation hung between us. My successful brother had been living with his own crushing insecurities all along. You know what I envied about you? He continued, surprising me? Your freedom. Your willingness to risk everything. To fail publicly and get back up. I could never do that. My whole identity is built on being perfect. Reliable Richard. And I envied your certainty. I confessed. Your clear path. The family's approval. Their pride when they talked about you. We stood in silence for a moment. Decades of misunderstanding suspended between us. I didn't know you maxed out credit cards for your business, he finally said. I didn't know you were afraid of failing, I returned. Richard leaned against the porch column. So what happens now? You're my boss? No, I clarified. I'll be overseeing technology integration across Next Bank subsidiaries, including Thornfield systems. Your day-to-day work remains unchanged. Unless you decide otherwise, he pointed out. I have no interest in interfering with the law firm's operations. That's not my expertise or my concern. Richard studied me skeptically. Just like that? No payback for years of being the family disappointment? What would be the point? I didn't build FinFlow to get revenge. I built it because I believed in the vision. And the $300 million didn't hurt. He added with a hint of his old sarcasm. I almost smiled. The validation is nice, I won't lie. But the money was never the primary goal. Easy to say when you have it. But the edge was gone from his voice. We stood in silence for a moment, watching darkness settle over the familiar backyard. The swing set where we'd played as children stood like a ghost of simpler times. Remember when Dad built that swing set? Richard asked, following my gaze. You kept redesigning it, drawing up improvements until he got so frustrated he let you add that ridiculous crow's nest on top, which you claimed was structurally unsound. I recalled. It was. It collapsed under Jeremy Farston at your 8th birthday party. Only because you and your friends were rocking it deliberately. We both laughed. The sound strange after so much tension. You were always rebuilding things, Richard said thoughtfully. I never understood it. If something worked, why change it? And you were always following rules to the letter, I countered. I never understood that either. If a rule didn't make sense, why follow it? Because chaos is inefficient, he said automatically. Because tradition is stagnation, I returned. We looked at each other and, for perhaps the first time since childhood, saw not the caricatures we'd created of each other, but two different men who'd taken different paths. I am good at what I do, Richard said quietly. Whatever you may think of corporate law, I know you are, I acknowledged. You've always been exceptional. And for what it's worth, FinFlow could use solid legal counsel as we integrate with Next Bank. Someone who understands both technology and traditional finance. He raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job? I'm suggesting a collaboration, I clarified. Your expertise, my platform. There's potential there that benefits us both. Richard was silent for a long moment. I'll think about it, he finally said, which from him was practically enthusiastic agreement. The back door opened, and Mom peered out. Dessert is waiting. Boys. Everything okay out here? Richard and I exchanged a look that acknowledged decades of competition, misunderstanding, and the tentative beginning of something new. We're fine, Mom, Richard answered. Just sorting some things out. We returned to the dining room, where the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Dad attempted awkward questions about FinFlow's technology. Mom suddenly remembered my elementary school science fair victories. Uncle Greg proposed a toast to both Miller boys, each exceptional in their own way. Throughout it all, Grandma Eleanor watched with quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching my eye with a knowing smile. As the evening drew to a close, the family dynamic hadn't transformed completely. Decades of patterns don't dissolve in a single night. But something had shifted, like the first crack in a frozen lake announcing the coming thaw. Driving home later, I called Sophia to share the evening's events. So your brother now knows his firm is under the Next Bank umbrella? He knows, I confirmed. It wasn't the smoothest revelation. Did it feel as good as you imagined? She asked perceptively. I thought about it. Not really. Turns out vindication isn't the same as validation. That, Sophia said wisely, is called growing up. 1 week after Grandma Eleanor's birthday dinner, I sat in my new office at Next Bank's Boston headquarters, watching the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The integration team meeting had just concluded, leaving me with 30 minutes before my next appointment, a private conversation with Richard. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind. The acquisition announcement generated industry buzz, with financial publications highlighting FinFlow's innovative approach to banking technology. Our team was adjusting to the transition, excited but understandably anxious about joining a larger corporate structure. I'd spent hours reassuring them that our culture and vision would remain intact, the very elements that had made us valuable to Next Bank in the first place. My assistant Derek knocked and entered with a coffee. Your brother is here. Conference room or office? Office is fine. Thanks, Derek. Richard arrived precisely on time. Dressed in his usual impeccable suit but with a slightly different energy, less rigid perhaps. He took in my new space with an appraising glance. Corner office with a view. Moving up in the world. It's temporary until they finish renovations on the tech floor, I explained. I prefer being near my team. He nodded, accepting the coffee Derek had brought. I've reviewed the integration proposal you sent. The technology migration timeline seems aggressive, but achievable, I noted. Your IT director agreed yesterday. Vincent thinks it's ambitious but doable, Richard acknowledged, referencing his firm's technology partner. He was impressed with your team's preparation. We spent 40 minutes discussing the practical aspects of bringing Thornfield's systems into the next bank ecosystem. Richard asked intelligent questions and offered insights about his firm's workflow that would prove valuable. We were collaborating professionally for the first time in our lives, and surprisingly, it worked. As we concluded, Richard hesitated before asking, "Are you free for dinner this weekend?" Heather suggested we should catch up properly. Sophia is welcome, of course. The invitation was clearly his wife's idea, but his willingness to extend it represented progress. I'd like that. I'll check with Sophia and confirm. Good. He gathered his papers, then paused. Mom called yesterday. They want to host a family dinner Sunday to celebrate your success. Her words. I laughed softly. That's new. Indeed. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Dad's apparently read everything he can find about FinFlow. He's becoming quite the fintech enthusiast. After Richard left, I called Jasmine to update her on the integration discussion. Your brother actually made constructive suggestions? She asked incredulously. The same brother who once said our business model was cute but unrealistic? People can surprise you, I replied. Sometimes they just need their perspective shifted. The following Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house with Sophia beside me. The atmosphere was markedly different from Grandma's birthday dinner. Mom had prepared my favorite meal, her special lasagna she'd previously reserved for Richard's accomplishments. Dad proudly showed me a Wall Street Journal article mentioning FinFlow that he framed for his study. I always knew you had potential, son, he declared, conveniently rewriting history. You just needed time to develop your vision. Rather than calling out the revisionism, I accepted the belated support graciously. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table, recognizing the significance of this shift. Richard and Heather arrived with an expensive bottle of wine and notably less tension. The conversation flowed more naturally, with my parents making genuine efforts to understand my work and Richard occasionally translating technical concepts into legal frameworks everyone could follow. After dinner, Grandma Eleanor asked me to help her in the garden, her subtle way of creating space for a private conversation. Among her prized roses, she took my hand in her weathered one. You handled it all beautifully, she said. Success is a powerful thing, but how you carry it defines you. I learned that from you, I replied. You've always seen me clearly, even when I couldn't see myself. Because you remind me of who I might have been with different choices, she said softly. When your grandfather proposed, I had just saved enough to put a down payment on that bookshop. I chose his path instead of my own. Do you regret it? I asked. No, she said thoughtfully. I loved him dearly. But I always wondered what if. That's why I've always encouraged you to follow your own star, however dim it seemed to others. It wasn't always easy, I admitted. The hardest paths often lead to the most worthwhile destinations, she said, wisdom gleaned from 85 years of living. I'm proud of what you've built, Travis. Not because it made you rich or proved others wrong, but because you stayed true to yourself through all the struggles. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. My relationship with Richard gradually transformed. Our weekly integration meetings evolved into occasional lunches where conversations stretched beyond business. He admitted the crushing pressure he'd felt as the successful son. I confessed the insecurity that had driven me to prove my worth. Understanding began to replace competition. 3 months after the acquisition, Richard proposed a new division within Thornfield focusing on fintech legal frameworks, a genuine bridge between our worlds. The market needs specialists who understand both sides, he explained. We could lead that space together. Sophia and I hosted Richard and Heather for dinner to celebrate the new venture. Watching my brother joke comfortably in my home, something unimaginable a year earlier, I realized the greatest success wasn't the acquisition or the financial security, but this healing of old wounds. My parents, too, were changing. Dad called regularly for business advice, finally seeing me as a professional equal. Mom proudly told her friends about my son, the financial technology innovator, with the same enthusiasm once reserved exclusively for Richard. The most profound change, however, was internal. The validation I desperately sought from my family had finally arrived, yet I discovered I no longer needed it. Somewhere along the entrepreneurial journey, I'd found something more valuable than approval: self-belief reinforced by purpose and perseverance. "You know what I've realized?" I told Sophia one evening as we walked along the Charles River. "Success didn't change me nearly as much as the struggle to achieve it." "That's usually how it works," she replied wisely. "The journey matters more than the destination." Grandma said something similar. I reflected. About staying true to yourself being more important than proving others wrong. Smart woman, your grandmother. The acquisition transformed my financial reality but clarified something more valuable: that true success comes from building things that matter, whether businesses or relationships. The sweet vindication of that dinner moment when Grandma silenced Richard was satisfying, but the real victory was creating something valuable enough to change my family's perception. Richard and I will never be identical in our approaches to life. He still prefers structure and tradition. I still push boundaries and question assumptions. But we've found common ground in mutual respect, perhaps even admiration, for each other's strengths. Last week, we launched the fintech legal practice together, Richard's expertise combined with my technological vision. Dad attended the opening reception, proudly introducing us as my sons, the innovators. Afterwards, Grandma Eleanor took my hand and whispered, "See? Some startups do become real jobs after all." Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? Did you eventually prove them wrong, or are you still working toward that moment of vindication? Drop a comment below to share your experience. I read every one. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences like this one. And remember, sometimes the greatest success isn't proving others wrong, but finding the strength to stay true to your vision when no one else believes in it. Thank you for listening, and never stop building your dreams, even when they look like just a startup to everyone else.